You're listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, the show that invites you into the lives of people who make up the Ultra family. Here's your host for these conversations, Larry Ryan.
Thank you, MJ. Steve and Gene King have just made it home to Penticton from the Ultraman World Championships after a few flight delays. Steve has been nice enough to call in a post-race report to share all of the highlights from this exciting return to the Big Island.
Hi there, this is Steve King reporting on the Big Island's Ultraman World Championship for 2022. 3 days of exciting racing and some incredible performances and some disappointments, of course. And day one being a very tough day, probably the toughest with that 10K swim and 90-mile bike right up to Volcanoes National Park. And it turned out to be out of the 39 starters at day one were paid to the goals of 8 of the athletes that were hoping to finish all 3 days, unfortunately. But the tough conditions on the swim meant that some swimmers were well over 5 hours, and the final swimmer was out of 5:51.42. But the lead swimmer, interestingly, 55-year-old Vancouverite Barry Berg, led the way with just 4 other swimmers, in fact, inside the 3-hour mark. They were Ryan Rinear, Dede Griesbauer, Rob Gray, and Leanda Cave. Rob Gray, a past champion. Dede holds the world best set in Florida. Leanda Cave, who's a 4-time world champion at Ironman, 70.3, long course and Olympic distance. Steve Keller, who's won Florida and Arizona. He was 6th out, 3:04.17, and just 7 seconds back of him was the pre-race favorite, Richard Thompson of Australia. Now, 20 minutes into the swim, Richard was the leader, but he had a torn rotator cuff at that point, so was in serious pain for the rest of the swim. When it came to the finish after the 90-mile bike as well, we had some issues there. Two of the athletes, in fact, that we know of, took a wrong turn. They went long instead of making the first right-hand turn, so they had a lot of extra time added to their time. However, at the finish line on day one, Rob Gray was the leader with an overall time of 7:32.13, just 14 seconds up on Dede Griesbauer. Richard Thompson, who had the fastest bike split of the day at 4:38.53, was about 11 minutes, 4 seconds back of the lead at that point. And Stephen Keller was a further 6 minutes, 33 seconds back at that point. Interestingly, Jon Greyell of Vancouver, he was at 8:19.34 total time. He was in 5th place. And Barry Berg at that point was in 6th position. Two-time women's champion, Tara Norton of Canada, she recorded 8:49. Now, she found herself in 7th position at that point. And Antonina Reznikov of Israel and Leanda Cave, they filled positions 9 and 10, both just seconds inside the 9-hour mark. I don't think Leanda was happy about that. She was one of those who went long, as was Jamie Harris, a 2-time winner in Florida, who found herself in 13th place at the end of day one. Day two, quite tragic in the sense that 2 of the athletes, 2 of the pre-race favorites as well, had major crashes. Rob Gray went down, and so did Barry Berg, the leader from the swim. So that was horrendous because, again, they were 2 of the main athletes that we would have liked to have seen fighting for a top position on the podium. There were a number of flats on day 2 as well, but the first person to the line was Richard Thompson, did a 7:34.05. Dede was actually at 7:56.02, but got a 6-minute penalty, and so her time became the second fastest ever by a female for day 2. But she broke the record, by the way, for the bike on day number 1 by recording her time, and that was a 4:42.34. That was 14 minutes, 56 seconds faster than any female has done that before. Jon Greyell was just, I think, in 4th position at that point with an 8:20, but Stephen Keller was our 3rd rider of the day. He had a flat. I know he was just 11 seconds over 8 hours. Antonina finished in 5th place, 8:35. Rodrigo Vasconcellos was 6th at 8:47. Tara was 7th at 9:03, and then around the 9:20 mark, Leanda came through the line. So things really got dramatically changed as a result of the bike courses, and obviously those crashes made a big difference. But when you look at the times, Dede was just 16 minutes and 7 seconds off the pace of our leader. 31 minutes, 40 seconds off the pace of our leader was the man considered to be the best runner in the field, and that was Stephen Keller. But there was 15 minutes 33 between he and Dede as well, vying for second and third. But Dede at that point had cemented a win, all being well on the run, because she was 2 hours and 4 minutes up on the second place female, being Antonina. Now, when it came to the day 3, the double marathon, it was an amazing start. Richard Thompson just blew right out. He did a 5:36 first mile. But once they got to the half marathon, there was a gap of about 2 minutes and 25 seconds, I believe. Stephen Keller had made a bit of a move then over Richard. Antonina was in third place. Alejandro Rivas was in fourth position at that time, and Dede was in seventh position, Leanda in ninth, and I believe Tara was in 17th. So positions were changing quite considerably. At the marathon mark, Stephen Keller did a 3:06, Richard a 3:12, Antonina a 3:35. Alejo and Dede were pretty much tied at 3 hours 42 minutes. Leanda just around 4 hours, and Tara 4:18. But when we got to the finish and got to that final half marathon, what was interesting, things had changed quite considerably from the 1.5 marathon mark onwards, because Richard had reassumed the lead at that point, but just by about 1 minute and 14 seconds. We were there to witness that. Antonina was the next person to go through, but she was 32 minutes back at that point. However, both Richard and Stephen ended up walking quite considerably in the last 10 miles or so. Richard ended up being the only person to go sub 7 hours. He did 6:55.15 to finish with a 3-day total of 22:13.38. Stephen finished at 7:21.58, so it shows you how tough it was on him in the latter stages. So he finished with a total time of 23:12.01. Antonina was next at 7:24.48, so she became in the top 5 overall for the run portion of the event. She was just inside 25 hours, less than a minute inside 25 hours, but that turned out to be a new record in the women's 40 to 49 division by 36 minutes and 2 seconds. But next up, Dede had a blinder of a run and a PR, a big PR for the run portion of the event. And I believe it was around 26 minutes faster than what she ran in Florida. Did a 7:48.29, set an overall time of 23:22.58. And what was wonderful was to see just how much ahead of the record she was, the overall women's record, that is, by 44 minutes and 13 seconds. But we have to remember that she is 52 years of age, and she not only took third place overall, there was just 10 minutes and 57 seconds between herself and Stephen Keller after the 3 days, but her record in the 50 to 59 division was by 5 hours, 30 minutes and 21 seconds. Fascinatingly, too, when you look at the top 3 in the women's division, because for the men it was Richard Thompson, Stephen Keller, and then Jon Greyell, who was 5th overall but took the title in the men's 40 to 49. He was delighted with that. But then you look at third place, the 4-time world champion Leanda Cave. She did around 26:54.11. And behind her in that 9th position was Tara Norton. Now, Tara's a 2-time winner here. But fascinatingly, she's off the podium, but still did her fastest ever time by 44 minutes with a 27:12 clocking. So things turned out to be quite amazing in the end. There were 28 overall finishes. The Honu finisher, meaning the final person, was Miguel Madrid Lopez of Spain, recording a 34:14.31. Yeah, I would like to mention, too, at the end of day 1, I think it's important to recognize how gaudy some of these people are. We had a number of people, as I mentioned, who weren't able to finish inside that 12 hours, but Acyr da Luz of Brazil carried on. He did 12:04. Armando Armellini did 12:09.55, and then he did go out and ride on day 2 and run and finish as well on day 3. And his goal had been to do all 4 of the Ultraman members of the Ultraman family in the same calendar year. So, in fact, he actually did that. It's just that his over 12-hour time on day 1 meant it wasn't an official finish. But Ariel Gorga of Argentina, he did 12:19.23 as well. Feature I would like to mention, by the way, is the fact that Gary Wang of the U.S. finished his 20th consecutive event at the Ultraman. He began his career in 2001, and he's finished every year that we've hosted an event. So amazing stuff. It was a 15th Ultraman finish for Juan Craveri, who's pretty much done all the events around the world. So we were delighted with how things unfolded, and a lot of very happy people, but also some sadness as well as a result of, the intricacies of this race. You never know what's coming at you. You have to expect the unexpected, and that certainly happened.
Thanks again, Steve, for filing that special report for us. It's great to fill in some of the gaps of the stories that we were watching on Facebook from the man who was right there on the course with the athletes. There were a lot of interesting stories that played out, as they usually do at these ultra races, and unfortunately for some, they're leaving the island with unfinished business. But I'm sure they'll be back again. Thank you for listening to this special edition of 515, the Ultra Podcast.
Hey, if you liked what you heard today, please tell a friend and be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. We'd appreciate it if you'd rate and review the show while you're there. Drop the names of the people you think we should interview, and we'll get in touch with them and make that happen. Thank you for listening to 515, the Ultra Podcast, a production of 55 Enterprises. Now really, go subscribe now before you forget.